Thank you, guys. Unfortunately, Sam is not able to join us right now. Hopefully, she'll be able to join us before the end of the webinar, but I'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to, again, thank Spark for suggesting this topic, knowing that the Autism Science Foundation is very, very interested in supporting and understanding the needs of siblings. I'll actually highlight now, but we'll talk about it later on in the webinar, a joint program that Sam actually started between the Autism Science Foundation and the Els for Autism Center. It's called Sam Sibs Stick Together. Her motivation as a sibling was to reach out to as many siblings as she can, to give support and show camaraderie, and also think about common experiences, common challenges and common joys that come from being a sibling. So we are having an upcoming webinar. It's basically a webinar series about science where siblings and their parents can join in and learn about the science around siblings and the research that's being done. Our next one will be on June 1st, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it at the end, since it's going to include a researcher that I'm highlighting in the talk. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Sorry, let me just advance. So on this webinar, we're going to do 4 basic things. Of course, I don't have the answers. Science doesn't have all of the answers yet. Siblings really aren't really the focus of interest. I went to INSAR and someone gave a presentation about how the community and families should be given supports as well. And I totally agree. So the first question I want to go through is, how is studying the infants or the infant siblings of individuals with autism improved our understanding of the early signs and later development of autism? Also, what do we know about siblings who don't have a diagnosis through childhood and adolescence? And I'll have to say, this is where we're really missing a lot of research. Then also, what scientific research is there out there about siblings through their life and how they interact with their autistic brother or sister? And finally, what do siblings want to know about and what are their priorities? And that's part of Sam Sibs Stick Together, is to allow, siblings to come together in a forum and share what their priorities and research are and what their needs are. So, you think about, we always traditionally think about how important the person with autism in the family is, and that's completely true. But we really know that a diagnosis affects the entire family. So just doing a quick census, a quick kind of back of the envelope count in terms of the number of people with autism in the United States, and then the rate of people who have a sibling. I've estimated that there are about 5.5 million siblings of autistic people just in the US. Obviously, that number is different for the world. Unfortunately, there are very few studies right now that focus specifically on the strengths and challenges that siblings have. And they do have particular challenges unique to having a sibling with autism. About 25% of the time, they end up becoming the primary caregiver once a family member, usually their parents, pass away. And so they really need some support. And a lot of them, this is anecdotal evidence, so I'm not going to say it's deep in science, but a number of them seem to go into helping fields. So speech pathology and science and medical school and, other supports, become caregivers themselves, or, occupational therapists, or, even area psychologists to help support others. So we'll talk about, kind of the research that's been done around siblings in terms of personality traits. So again, they're important. They make a real real difference in the lives of people with autism, but they're kind of rarely included in research. So kind of the very first earliest studies this talk is about, from infancy to adulthood. So let's start with infancy. So some of the earliest studies on autism and how we understand both the genetics and the early signs and symptoms were done on baby siblings. So siblings have a 15 times, or 1 in 5, or 20%, there's a bunch of numbers for you, they have an elevated chance of an autism diagnosis themselves, or an elevated likelihood. So researchers got together and thought, God, wouldn't it be this great opportunity for us to understand how autism develops before you can even see some of the behavioral features, and that includes not just in behavior, but in neurobiology as well. So they can study the early signs of autism, and they can study the biology. And we know that, and I won't get into this, but the brains of people with autism are different even before that 18 to 24 month time period when they can get an accurate diagnosis. And these studies can also focus in on those with a sibling, some of which go on to develop an autism diagnosis and some that don't. So I'll get into this in a minute, but if there's a 20% chance of having an autism diagnosis, there's a 80% chance that you won't have a diagnosis. So what about those siblings? So what happens in these studies, and I'm including pictures of my favorite siblings, which are my two daughters. We're part of one of the original Spark families, so you can see more pictures of our family if you go to the Spark website. These are my daughters, Jennifer and Sarah, at 8 weeks, and then 9 months, and then 2 years, and then 3 years. And so really what these studies do is, my girls are twins, so they really can't follow twins because you need an older sibling. So say that there was an older sibling and then that family went on to have another child. So the person with autism in the family is 2, the mother is having another child. These researchers follow those children all the way from birth, typically about 6 months, because that's about the time when families kind of are able to get things together to participate in research studies, to 12 months, to 18 months, to 24 months, to 36 months when they get a diagnosis. And even further than that, these siblings are being followed into adulthood now to better understand what goes on. So, are there particular strengths and particular challenges? What do they experience throughout their lifespan? So they also look at things that promote resilience. And again, I talked about the biological features, which we won't get into on this webinar. Oops, how can I? So what we're going to focus on, though, are those sibling features of those without a diagnosis. So that 80%. So if 20% end up with an autism diagnosis, what about the 80%? So really, if you look at it, what I'm going to focus in on, this is the 20% that have autism. What about the other 80%? So there was a study done led by Daniel Messenger, but it was part of this Baby Siblings Research Consortium, which is a group of about 50 researchers from around the world that all focus on understanding the very earliest features of autism, all the way from birth. Some studies are even looking at pregnancy variables, the early autism longitudinal risk study, as well as the MARBLE study at UC Davis, are looking at pregnant moms to look at some prenatal markers. But what researchers found as they reached age 3 is that of these 80%, so this number is here, is of the 80% who don't end up with an autism diagnosis. So 65% of them, so a majority of them, end up with somewhat of a typical diagnosis or without any sort of developmental delay or any sort of autism features. So another 14% of those siblings who don't have an autism diagnosis do have strong presence of autism features. And they also have developmental delays that can be language delays or delays in milestone development and some, cognitive delays. And then the other 21% may have, I'm sorry. So the 14%, I apologize. The 14% are those that have some autism traits, but seem to be doing pretty well developmentally. The 21% is the ones that have a high level of autism traits and have somewhat of a developmental delay. So what does that mean when I talk about, autism traits? Oops, I'm sorry, I'm trying to forward. So this is a study that was done, again, through the Baby Siblings Research Consortium, looking at those who do not have a family member with an autism diagnosis. So they have, let's say a 4% chance of having a developmental delay and a 4% chance, and I'm just focusing on males for simplicity, who have a chance of a developmental delay. If you look at those who already have a sibling, that number jumps to 4 times what it would be if there was no sibling. and twice of what there would be if there was no sibling. So these are developmental delays, things on language, motor, and cognitive ability. Then you look at autism traits. You see about, again, 20% having some sort of autism trait in those who have no sibling. And then that jumps up to 33% if you do have a sibling. So, again, I also want to emphasize these are sibling traits. And I want to actually specifically mention here that we don't want to pathologize autism traits. These are things that people have. The differences in diversity in people in their traits and anything should be valued and appreciated. And these are not the same as a diagnosis. But what we're finding is, or scientists are finding, is that sometimes these traits accumulate with not just autism traits in terms of, liking the same routine or insistence on sameness or even other things. But if they accumulate, then they can pose a real challenge for siblings, especially if they go ignored because they didn't actually receive an autism diagnosis. So it's a fine line between, kind of saying, okay, well, they have an autism trait, therefore they need supports, to they have not just autism traits, but they have other challenges in functioning that call for support and call for interventions, but it's not autism. This was a study done, and I'm not going to lie, I stole this graphic from Spectrum News. This is a likelihood of psychiatric conditions in siblings with autism. So this is people all together. And this was done in Finland. So this is looking not in infants, but looking more towards adolescents and adults. But I wanted to make the point that about 17.4% have some sort of psychiatric issue, and you can see what they are, whether it's attention deficit disorder, conduct and oppositional disorder, emotional disorder, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, tic disorders, that about 17% are affected in the general population, at least in Finland, but about 36.9% of siblings are affected throughout, the time, has been affected at one time or another. So again, these are the things I would say: mood disorders and anxiety disorders, intellectual disability and learning disorders aren't things that things that people need support and help with. But again, since they don't always fall within the autism spectrum, they don't always get the attention that they need. So what happens is these young kids, I mentioned psychiatric issues, but how about when they grow into adolescence and adulthood? What do we know about them? What we do know about them, and I have listed, and you're welcome to have these slides, I have listed the author's last name and the year it was published at the bottom of each slide, because I am presenting other people's data, is that there is a high level of empathy. So this study was done in a sample of siblings, again, who had this is the siblings of people with autism who they themselves don't have a diagnosis, but they have a sibling with a diagnosis, and then those who have a sibling with a typically developing diagnosis. So not another disorder. And you see that there is an increase in perspective taking in autism siblings, which has led to a higher empathy score in these siblings. So we're not saying this isn't something that every sibling has. It's something that we're noticing a trend in siblings without that diagnosis. Another study did a focus group on individuals with autism, their siblings with autism, and looked at 5 main themes. So learning, empathy, and compassion, which we just talked about. The relationship between the degree of functional impairment, so whether the sibling with autism had an intellectual disability, whether they had a language disorder, whether they were verbal, or whether they had aggressive or irritable behaviors. They looked at that and the nature of the relationship. They looked at things like reluctance to share information about their ASD sibling with peers. That's another theme that got brought up. One of the things that Sam has said about the Sam Sibs Together group is that they can share with each other. They all kind of get it. They all know, they can complain and say this sucks, or they can say this has been wonderful. And they all have their own unique challenges. And a lot of kids don't have a sibling with autism. And so their peer groups are people without a sibling with autism who may not understand it. They also have worries and concerns about the future. I mentioned 25% become the primary caregiver. For a lot of siblings, that's not something that they're necessarily wanting to take on at different points in their life. And then also hypervigilance associated with unpredictable behavior. So they all shared, a commonality of these things. And then when another study, when they reflect on their feelings, 13% of them reported nothing but positive emotions and experiences. So nothing equivocal, just everything positive. Only 41% of them felt like they were accepted in their own peer groups or by other individuals their same age. 93% had a negative emotion or experience, but that's, not only it was, mixed in. So of course, I have a sibling, I have negative emotions about that sibling. It's not uncommon to ask someone what their emotions are about their sibling to have a negative part. So the positive aspects were tolerance, understanding, and empathy. Again, siblings themselves reported that they felt like they had a greater tolerance for differences and understanding of people with disabilities and challenges. So they also reported that that having a sibling with autism had a positive effect on their family, that in fact, it brought their family together. And they also felt like they had a better understanding and had definite, warm, obviously love, caring, compassionate feelings about the person with autism that kind of that their sibling that kind of translated to the autism community as a whole. So we want to support siblings. We want to make sure that they, just like people with autism, that they're living their best lives. So this was a study that was done actually out of New York to look at sibling support groups and the effects that it had on the siblings. So if you want to look at this here, you can see huge differences, and I'll take you through the graphs. I have told the authors I didn't love the way that these axes were set up, because I think it magnifies, it makes it look like there's these huge differences. There's definitely improvements. So this is the result of a sibling support group. So these individuals had a sibling support group, and that's the teal line. And then the control is kind of like a waitlist group. So they were given kind of educational materials. They weren't part of an active support group. They were given, kind of offline information, but it wasn't part of an interactive group where people talk to each other. And they found that, in fact, at the beginning, people that were in the support group had, this is the SIBS S, and this is just a basic kind of general support. How do you feel supported? How do you feel socially? How do you feel about your interaction with your sibling? How do you feel about your relationship with your family? There was a slight difference here. Again, this wasn't significant. But after the support group was given, they were asked to reflect on their feelings. And those in the control group really didn't show much of a change, but those who participated in a sibling support group showed a huge increase in this score. And they also showed an increase in the number of initiations that they would make towards their so how many times that they initiate communication, or that they initiate a connection with their siblings. That kind of went up with the support group, but went down with or was significantly different at time 2 in those that didn't receive that support. So we want to provide social support for siblings at the very least. That seems like it's low-hanging fruit and things that we absolutely should be doing. So there was just a study at a meeting I went to last week, and it was just published, and so I just added it. But this is a group out of Finland who also did kind of a systematic review of things that when they were in what were things that were associated in about 13 studies with increased levels of support, and where was the association? So what are the things, if you had to boil all of the papers and all of the research down in terms of what's good as part of support, and what does support give you, then, or what contributes to good support? The positive associations were There was good relationships between having a good support network and social behavior, academic functioning, competence, problem-focused coping, higher self-concept, and family quality of life. So these supports helped in these ways. Now, when no support was there, if there was so the support was associated with lower levels of these things like somatic problems, depression, loneliness, stress, internalizing and externalizing factors. So these are the things that support didn't help with. It did help with these things, but it didn't help with these things. But again, we need to get better at saying, okay, we need to provide support in different ways on these particular items. So the take-home message was that things like higher level of stress, parent health concerns, sibling depression symptoms, and psychosocial adjustment problems may be particularly important. And social support needs to be focused on that going forward. So the other thing that having a sibling does is help autistic functioning. So this is a study that looked at those longitudinal points. So anywhere between age 2 to age 26. And they looked at the presence of a sibling. And this is Nicole Rosen, and I'll talk about her in a little bit. But this is just having a sibling. So again, there's a lot of messy things in this, and we thought this Autism Science Foundation thought this study was so remarkable that we funded her to look into this more and to gather more data across more data sets. But just having a sibling, now the improvement is seen by the slope of the line. So that's how steep the line is. This may not be noticeable to you, and I completely confer with you, but the slope of the line was higher. So in fact, this is the Vineland behavior scale. So this is about functioning levels, and are they able to do the things that you think they can do? Are they getting dressed? Are they communicating? Are they making friends? So these things was better with one or more siblings. So just the presence of having a sibling significantly improved functioning in those who had autism. Now, there's obviously a lot of things going on in here. One of the things is racial and ethnic disparities. The effect was shown to be a little bit stronger in Black families. Again, very, very early studies, and I don't want to say anything about that other than it's an interesting finding that needs to be followed up with more families who come from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. But it seems that just having a sibling, and that could be one or more, really helps the day-to-day lives of people on the spectrum throughout their life, even to age 26. So we agree that these are very interesting findings. And if you have any questions about these, I'm going to show you what you can do to get those questions answered. But it's very, very early, and I'm very happy that we're supporting Nicole Rosen, who works with Kathy Lord, to look at more longitudinal cohorts to really better understand not just the racial and ethnic differences, but also things within those SIBs, like, what was the cognitive ability of the SIB or I'm sorry, of the person with autism? Did it help just a subgroup? So we're definitely interested in that and help, and hope to share that later. But it does seem to help people on the spectrum to have a sibling. Now, there are, as I mentioned, racial, ethnic, and cultural factors. So this was a study done from siblings in both Taiwan, where and I'll get to this, I'm just going to tell you right now, there is a high cultural stigma against having autism. Autism is thought to not be considered both a positive and a negative thing. There's certainly still in Taiwan a certain amount of shame with autism, which a friend of mine who has and I would love for her to speak more about this, time difference in South Korea and Taiwan, but there is a huge cultural stigma. So when people thought about having a sibling with autism, they actually thought more about things like distance and conflicts and worries. They also felt like they were more different rather than the same. If you look at the UK, where autism is considered to be more of kind of a difference and a societal difference and a trait. There seem to be, kind of more feelings about being the same as their sibling rather than different, and having camaraderie among other siblings and other families. And then things that they wanted to share with other people. Whereas in Taiwan, they felt like there was more a sense of embarrassment, and then also a feeling of keeping it more inside the family. So just cultural factors may play a huge influence about sibling development and then also sibling functioning. So looking at those cultural factors, a study looked at both Latino, or we'll call them Latinx siblings, so siblings from a Latinx background. They looked at them on different aspects. So whether they perceived having a positive or challenging aspects of having an autism sibling, and thinking about the typicality of autism. And then also, what were their roles in that sibling relationship? So non-Latinx siblings found it to be challenging and fun, but put an emphasis on the difference. They actually reported having less sibling interaction and felt that they were more a caregiver, and they didn't really know if they were a protector or not. Whereas Latinx siblings really focused on the typicality and how similar they were to their siblings rather than how different they were to their siblings. They reported greater sibling interaction. They reported more a caregiver role. So instead of helping their parents, they helped their sibling with autism. And they said that there was a strong feeling that they felt like they were more of a protector. Now, again, I always hate to say this is just generalizations, and it doesn't mean that any one particular, I'm not talking about every single Latinx sibling or every single non-Latinx sibling. This isn't a rule by any account. This is more just what people are finding in qualitative studies, which again, are limited by their sample size, but we want to get the lived personal experience of siblings. So the takeaways from this talk are, and I wanted to leave plenty of time for question and answers, is that siblings are special. They provide enormous amounts of support to families, whether they're support to the parent or the person with autism, or both. They may experience their own challenges. They do improve the lives of their autistic brothers and sisters, and we need more research to better understand how they can be supported and helped. I did want to invite you all, and I'll leave it on this note. On June 1st, we have invited Nicole Rosen, who did that study on the presence of siblings and how it affected the functioning of people on the spectrum. We're inviting her to our webinar. Our regular SAM-SIB Stick Together webinar occurs, we're trying to do it quarterly. And the next one will include Nicole Rosen and talking about the benefits of having a sibling. And also we're going to talk about future research directions. We invite siblings and parents and anyone who has connections with the sibling to register for the webinar. You can go to samsibsticktogether.com or .org. I already forgot. Sorry, it's in my bookmarks. It's one of those. Scroll to the bottom, and under webinars, it's right there. So at the very beginning, you have to click webinars, and we can go to the website, but you just click webinars and then you scroll to the bottom to register. I've got it going on another screen. You click webinars at the top. At the bottom, you can have a chance, you scroll down and you can register for the June 1st webinar. And I really encourage everyone to be a part of, who's interested to be a part of this community. We invite as many siblings to connect. We have it in meeting format so that people can have interactions with each other. And I know that there's been a number of interactions offline, and we're, as part of that website, we also have a number of resources for families. And we also have a page completely dedicated, which we update regularly, to some of the major scientific findings that have helped the lives of people with autism and their siblings. So all of the studies I just presented are in that list, but I highly suggest people kind of go to the website and look it over, and please join us, if not on June 1st, click and sign up, and we'll let you know about the next webinar. So I'm happy. Dominique, should I take off share screen or should I leave on share screen? Just so if people want to go back to a different slide, we can do that.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. If you want to keep shared screen on in case any of these questions would be supported by revisiting, we can do that.
Sure.
That would be great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Alycia. We've definitely received quite a few questions, so I'm glad we have plenty of time to hopefully get through some of these. So we'll just start things off with this question here. Could you provide an update on research regarding the risk of ASD in a niece or nephew of an individual with ASD? And is there a difference in the risk versus looking at brothers and sisters?
I am so glad someone asked that question. One of the slides I didn't include is about a project called the Next Gen Siblings Project. Oh, Samantha's joining us. Yay. So Samantha's getting to join us, and I will answer the question about the Next Gen Sib study, and then Samantha can be open for questions. So this is a study. There have been early reports of if you have a, if you're a sibling of someone with autism, and then you're going on to have children yourself. So that child would be the niece or the nephew. There is an increased likelihood of that child having an autism diagnosis. It's not the same as having a sibling, but it's definitely elevated compared to what you would see in the community. We don't know anything about what those early signs and symptoms are. We don't know, if early eye contact, it comes before sensory issues. We so far, we know a lot about some of the early features of autism, but early in those direct siblings. So the Autism Science Foundation is partnering with the Emory Autism Center and also the UCLA. So Nicole Rosen is actually working on this project to better understand that. And the first part of that is to get the perspectives of siblings themselves about what sorts of research they want to see in terms of they may have children, they may be having children in the future. What are some of their questions? What are some of their research priorities? So we are having individual interviews or focus groups to allow you guys who are siblings to tell us the sorts of questions you have or the research priorities you have. And if anyone has a question about how to participate in that and wants to participate in that, please email me. And I think my email address is somewhere. If not, I can make a quick slide about it, but it's a.halladay@autismsciencefoundation.org, and you can just Google me as well. But I can definitely direct you, depending on where you live, if you're interested in joining that, to one of the sites. Can I put it? I'll put it to everyone. I'll put my email address in there.
Great, thanks, Alycia. And Sam, thank you so much for hopping on. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk a little bit about yourself, since we do have, we'll have a good amount of time to jump back into Q&A after that. So if you wanted to take a few minutes, talk about your experience as a sibling of an individual with autism.
Yeah, absolutely. Can anyone see my video at the moment?
Let me stop sharing my screen. That's the problem. So now you share yours.
No worries. I think everyone can see me now when I speak. So perfect.
Yes, you should be.
So hi, everyone. My apologies for missing the presentation portion of this, but my name is Samantha Els. I've been working with Alycia for almost 2 years now on what she was just talking about, which was Sam Sib Stick Together. And I think for me personally, I am still getting into all of the research and all of the data that goes into just the experiences that I've had every day, and being able to share those with the group of panelists that I've gotten to work with over the last 2 years has been phenomenal. So for me specifically, it's been, how can I take my experience, my version of normal, whatever that means for everybody, and how can I share that with people and connect that to the data and the work that people like Alycia are doing about exactly what it is that makes our connection special, and how we can spread not only awareness, but understanding of how everyone can connect with people this way. But yeah, I'm basically just here for any questions that people might have. Alycia is definitely the more technical of the two of us, but I did just finish up my degree in human biology at Stanford, so I have a little bit of an idea of what I'm saying nowadays. And I'll try and field questions as best I can.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. Okay, so I will just jump back into our list of questions. Some more have started to quickly trickle in as we've been chatting, so we'll do our best here. So sort of in a, I guess in a related vein to the niece and nephew question that we just answered, we had a question come in about if there's any research on multi-generational diagnoses. So this came in from an individual who is both a sibling and a parent, but is neurotypical themselves. And they're actually interested in knowing if there's ways that they can participate in and help with research given their relationship to autism.
I would say, and I'm just going to put a plug in for participating in any research project that that comes up. So ASF is in the middle of redoing our website to make research studies more accessible, depending on where you live, if it's online, if it's in person, if you're a sibling, if you're a parent, if you're an individual themselves. I want to encourage everyone, if the opportunity presents itself, one of them is through Spark. You guys have already done that. So that's a great start. But if there's any other studies that you can participate in as a sibling, I would always encourage you to do that. The other thing is, again, I'll mention the next generation SIBs, since you mentioned the multi-generation aspect of it. I put my email in the chat, and please contact me, because there is a study. Again, it's not determining who's going to have a diagnosis and not. It's more, we want to know from the families themselves, from the siblings, from the parents, what is your perspective? What do you want to know? What sorts of studies would be important to you? Because then in the next phase, we're going to build a database of these multi-generational SIBs to help not just the next generation, but their parents and their siblings. And there's a lot we don't know, but the first thing we want to know is what's important to you. So so email me, and I will definitely hook you up with, and they can be done online. So don't worry, you don't have to travel to Atlanta or travel to Los Angeles. They actually, one of these things they like doing online. So you can either participate in a group and share your experiences, or you can participate one-on-one. But part of this first phase of this is to better hear from you guys. What are your research priorities? And then I'll let Sam talk.
Yeah. Yeah, from my personal experience, I just, like I said, finished up university, and one of the best resources that I had was not only Alycia and the team, but the people that were around me. So as soon as I started talking about my experiences, I realized that 4 of my teammates on my rugby team were also siblings, and some of them were involved in advocacy and research themselves. So I think from just a grassroots level, the more that you're open about your experience, the more that you can talk about it, the more you realize that the people around you are doing some incredible work. I do have to shout out to Stanford in general, just for having some incredible people that I get to casually live with and work with. And everybody has some really cool stories. But the Wall Lab at Stanford was also recruiting during my undergrad time, and are doing some really interesting work on just general wearables or app technologies, and lots of things that were helpful just in the home setting. So again, you don't have to go in anywhere. They're very easy to reach and contact. But yeah, as Alycia was saying, anyone and everyone would love participants. So anyone that you can find and reach out to, it's actually a really close-knit community.
Awesome, thank you both. So we had what's really great is we have a lot of people kind of asking similar questions. So I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize some of what we're being asked. So one thing that came in from a few people is if there are any noticeable differences based on age gaps between the child with autism and the neurotypical child. So if it's a 2-year age gap versus a 10-year age gap between siblings.
I'll start, and then Sam can comment on her experience. But I think that the dynamic between siblings and families is just different in general. So disclosure, so my father and my youngest aunt are 13 years apart. And I can tell you that his relationship with her is much different than his relationship with his sibling that's only 2 years apart. So I think that that plays into it. We also have to realize that, there has been no specific research on it, but I would be surprised if the dynamic isn't reflective of the typical dynamic that you see in a family where there's an older, a much older sibling. My daughter has a friend whose kids are in college, so they're 11, and then the older siblings in college. Now that dynamic and the family dynamic in general is different. So, these are families living in real life, and they have autism layered on that. So, I don't know, that research hasn't been done, but I want to also point out that typically developing relationships and interactions and dynamics are different when there's age gaps as well.
Yeah, and building off of that, I would say that your role as a sibling is going to be different at different points in your collective development as well. So there might be a 3-year age gap, there might be a 10-year age gap, and those roles might be reversed at different times. So in my case, my brother is younger than me, and it made my motherly role a lot easier because it was very natural. I always lived with him. I was always the one that was taking care of him and protector. But my friend is a twin, and she still has all of these same relationships where at times you are a caregiver, at times you are best friend, at times you are purely an annoyance, and they are to you as well. And those are just hallmarks of sibling relationships, not just sibling relationships regarding autism. I do think that age gap, the impact that it has is going to change over the lifetime too. So just because my brother is 3 years younger than me, now that we're a little bit older, he's still my little brother in a lot of ways. And so that's kind of the same, but also it matters less than it used to when we were in grade school and we had different playgrounds because we were of different ages. And so there's going to be different barriers as you grow up, but the same roles are going to be played. You're always going to be annoying. You're always going to be the sister. You're always going to be involved.
Great. And I think, you made some good points, Sam, that were a nice segue into another common question that we've been asked. Just talking about that sibling dynamic and, how it can sometimes just naturally, there can be competition between siblings, whether they're, have an autism diagnosis or not. So we have some people asking about, particularly with teens, how a neurotypical teen, how they can best, adapt and understand, the role that they're playing, to Sam's point, that caregiver role that you have to take on. So yeah, just a little bit, delving a little bit deeper, I suppose, about suggestions for a parent helping their neurotypical teen navigate this sibling relationship.
I can take point on this one and then have Alycia go, because Alicia's got some of the motherly things going. I'm still I just got out of the teenage section. So my biggest piece of advice would be understanding that the needs are going to be different, but both needs are important to be met. So my brother's needs are very different. He needs very structured time. He needs a lot of his own time, maybe a little bit of the one-on-one, but really he's actually more independent than I am. And for my parents to have to realize that was kind of difficult because, of course, he's the one on the spectrum. So he's the one that should be getting more attention. He's the one that's going to need more in order to reach the same baseline that I'm at. Meanwhile, I was the really needy one of the two of us. And so that meant my parents had to put time aside to do things specifically with me, whether that was going out to dinner, just me and my mom, or just me and my dad, because somebody still had to stay home with Ben. But it meant that we could work around my needs and honoring them, which I needed less time, but I needed more specific items. So just kind of understanding that both of your kids are going to have things that they need from you, but it might look different. So where my brother needs like 8 hours out of the day, I would need maybe one of just pure one-on-one time. Within the sibling relationship when I was a teenager, I was definitely really frustrated because I wanted to do a lot of my own things. I could finally drive, which meant that I now got to pick my brother up from school, not go to my friends' houses after school. And so as that adapts, like I was saying, there's going to be different challenges. But I think one of the coolest stories that I heard actually with Alycia was a family that has weekly check-ins of, hey, at this dinner, we're going to sit down, we're going to look at what we did this week and who needs a break this week, you know? Somebody needs to just sit in their room and read for a day, or maybe binge watch a Netflix show, or go to a friend's house for a night. And just being able to meet each person in the family where they're at on a weekly basis, I think is really important. So just that evaluation process helps.
And I'll say I took that advice when I heard it with my own family, and it's been really miraculous. And but that's my family. So every family is different. And I think that each family has their own unique experiences, right? So, whether it's the functioning level or how that sibling, how their mental health is at any particular time, and what's going on in the individual with autism and what's going on with the parents. I mean, the other thing is something I learned last week. Someone said something completely not related to siblings, but more around COVID-19, was like, if the mental health of the parents is not being taken care of, how on earth can they take care of the mental health? And this had to do with COVID. So I'm not saying it has anything to do with siblings, but how on earth could they, attend to the mental health needs of their kids? And so I kind of like take that into account too. And there's definitely times when, as the girls are becoming tweens, that, I'm noticing that, the one without autism needs a little bit of extra time. She can sometimes feel neglected. And I think that that's true with any sibling dynamic. And then you add that extra layer of complexity in it. And the other thing that we don't completely understand yet are some of the factors that go into that, right? So if your autistic sibling has an intellectual disability, or how they communicate, and what their level of support needs are, and again, whether they're, a couple years younger or much younger, whether they even attend the same school district, all of these things can play, an important role that I think we need, to better understand. And the way we're going to do that is research, and also big research studies, because, all of these subtle nuances in families are going to be subtle nuances reflected of that one family. So we need to at least get people together to better understand groups of people.
Great, thank you. And then kind of in the same vein of this, but perhaps this is something we can maybe share on the Spark site alongside this webinar, some books and resources and perhaps support groups for the neurotypical siblings, particularly in that teen bracket. So we can do our best as a group offline to compile that for those on the call that they can reference later.
That's absolutely something that we've tried to put on the SAMSIB Stick Together website. And we could definitely, if there are resources that the community knows about and they like and they trust, send it to us, and we will make sure it's shared on that website, because that's part of what we want to do.
Great. So it sounds like everyone's looking for the same things. And I know even a couple people in the chat have shared groups, so I can share that back, Alycia and
oh,
Sam.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so another question that came in, this is kind of going a little bit more back to the research, into the research lane here. But if either of you know anything about research in regards to twins and late diagnoses as a result to a neurotypical twin perhaps overcompensating for their ASD twin.
So that's an area of research I'm not so sure about. What I can tell you is that if there's an older sibling, so typically, now this is just as a group, so that if there's an older sibling and that family knows the diagnosis and knows that there's a developmental issue and is aware, they are typically, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but in the demographic that the Baby Sibs research studies have included, they are typically very hypervigilant. So they are very, very kind of like, what's going on? They're walking at 10 months, not 9 months, all of these different things. They're kind of hypervigilant. They're also, for some of this research, one of the issues is that they're participating in these really in-depth research studies. And so they probably don't represent, their families that are hypervigilant, hyper aware, paying attention to, are going to these, monthly or quarterly or yearly appointments with their developmental pediatricians, who have a pediatrician, who live near a site where the research is being conducted. So, I think that more research needs to be done in more community-based settings where things are in real life. But there hasn't really been any research so far about that younger sibling maybe compensating. The research so far shows that that the parents and the support system are so hypervigilant that they're probably being detected maybe a little bit earlier. But that doesn't, again, that represents this kind of one group, and we need to get better about including more real life community samples.
I think, speaking from just the sociological perspective on all of that, like we were saying, it's a really under-researched group because it is something that is so specific, like a twin in which one twin is living a very different neurotypical life to their twin on the spectrum. One of my best friends is a twin, and her brother is on the spectrum and was diagnosed later, actually. And so just through her, some of the resources that she connected me to was, there's a podcast on Spotify that she really enjoys listening to that's called The Secret Life of Sibs, I believe. And it's great. And that's something that she really relied on during that time. But in terms of the overcompensation, I think we have a tendency to, I say we as siblings, I think we have a tendency to view ourselves as overcompensating. I don't think that this is something that is autism specific. I think that if you have any type of dynamic within your siblings, there's always going to be competition, right? So there's always going to be one sibling that feels like they're either out competing or under competing with the other sibling. When you have a sibling, like in my case, in a lot of ways, my parents tried to minimize that competition almost by having only child type expectations for me. My expectations are not the same as my brother's. And those are, it seems obvious once you say it, but it's really important to internalize that when you're growing up and the expectations are going to be different, there's less of a need to overcompensate when you understand that these are just different things that are going to be working together. It moves you from a sort of problem-oriented mindset to something that's more of a symbiosis. My brother and I don't have to compete because what he does better than me helps me, and what I do better than him helps him. And I think a lot of that helps with that sort of perception. I think a lot of the idea that there's overcompensation can be from a parental perspective. I think parents are very scared and hypervigilant of the dynamic between atypical sibling relationships because it's not what most people are used to. But remember, for us, this is our version of normal. So I've never lived in a world where I didn't have the sibling relationship that I have with my brother. So I never felt like I was compensating or overcompensating for anything because this is my whole experience. For my parents, their relationships were different, but this is all I have. And so I didn't feel as much of that, but it is not an invalid response by any means.
Great, thank you both. And so I think we have time for one more question. So we had an individual ask, we're obviously talking a lot about the impact of having a sibling with autism on a neurotypical sibling, but we had an individual asking about, what's known about the reverse. So the impact of the neurotypical sibling on the sibling with autism. Or even if what you've observed in your own lives, perhaps maybe not a research answer, but.
You mean the impact of having a neurotypical sibling on the person with autism?
Yes, correct. Sorry if I did not.
No, that's okay. The only study, so the study that I referred to, Nicole Rosen's study, was actually the only study that I know of so far that's looked at that functioning. And they looked at the Vineland, which looks at a number of different things, including, daily living skills, communication skills, things like that. And as I showed, it did improve. You know, if you looked at the two lines, like one went like this and one went like this. And so there was somewhat an improvement in that functioning. Now it's a clue on, okay, there was a lot of variability there. Okay, what best predicts that improvement, right? So race and ethnicity was one thing. They can possibly look at, we're funding her to possibly look at the age difference between the siblings. Does that have an influence? The gender of the siblings, do sisters do a better job than brothers? Things like that. But it definitely is, it seems to promote better adaptive functioning. I'm not telling anyone to go out and have kids if you have one kid. That's not the point of this. It's just to kind of examine what the nature of the relationship is, and then also, you know, promote those things, promote the well-being and mental health of that sibling so that they can better, you know, help the family dynamic.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is that while siblings are sort of purpose-built little bridges between their sibling and the rest of the world, the skills that we've picked up in making our world accessible to our sibling is not unique to just us. You know, we are uniquely good at it, but anyone can learn it, and anyone is capable of doing the same thing that siblings would be able to do. I think that the time that we spend with our siblings is probably part of why that is such a positive increase. If you have so much one-on-one like you would in a household, it helps when you have somebody that completely understands. Like my brother's stimming, I can explain it to my friends. That makes them more socially acceptable of him, which makes him have an easier time in those situations in the future. But my mom's also really good at doing that. And my dad's also really good at doing that. So while I am purpose-built for this, it is not imperative to have more kids. Your kid can still be good.